the sky above New Avalon was not blue. It hadn't been for decades. The thick haze of industrial smog, pumped out by Zalari factories, turned the heavens into a sickly shade of gray-green. Once, New Avalon had been a thriving human colony, a beacon of progress. Now, it was nothing more than a slave world, its people toiling under the iron fist of the Zalari Empire. Elias Voss had known nothing but oppression since the day he was born. Like every other human, he had been taught to bow his head, to keep his voice low, and to never, under any circumstance, defy the Zalari. The punishment for disobedience was swift and merciless. That morning, he had seen it firsthand. A young woman, a mere teenager, had stolen a loaf of nutrient bread. Desperation had driven her to it, and for that crime, the Zalari overseer had made an example of her. The execution was public. The girl's body still hung from the plasma pikes outside the governor's palace, her charred remains a grim reminder of the cost of defiance. Voss clenched his fists. How long are we going to let this happen? His voice was barely a whisper. Across from him, in the dimly lit confines of an underground shelter, a group of humans sat in silence. They were workers, engineers, former soldiers, men and women who had suffered the same injustices, who had watched their loved ones perish under the Zalari's boot. You talk as if we have a choice, muttered Callum Briggs, a grizzled ex-miner. We're outmatched, Voss. The Zalari have warships that can turn a planet to dust. Their soldiers are twice as strong as we are. You've seen what they do to rebels. I've seen what they do to everyone, Voss shot back. And it won't stop. You think if we keep our heads down, they'll show us mercy? No. They'll keep tightening the noose until there's nothing left of us. There was a long pause. No one spoke. Outside, the distant sound of Zalari patrols echoed through the streets. Their reptilian voices barked commands, their clawed feet clanking against the metal walkways. Then, a voice broke the silence. We have a choice. All eyes turned to Sarah Holt, a former Earth Navy pilot. She had been silent until now, but there was a fire in her eyes, a smoldering ember of defiance. We fight, she said, her voice steady. Not because we think we can win. Not because we have the advantage. We fight because if we don't, we're already dead. A heavy stillness settled over the room. Voss looked around. He saw it in their faces, the fear, the doubt, but also something else. A flicker of hope. This isn't just about us, he said. The Zalari have enslaved dozens of species. But humanity, we're different. We don't break. We don't kneel forever. If we stand up, others will follow. The Empire is strong, yes. But so was every tyrant before they fell. Silence. Then, Briggs exhaled sharply. Damn it, Voss. He shook his head, but a slow smile crept across his face. You're going to get us all killed. Not if we do it right. Sarah leaned forward. What do you have in mind? Voss glanced at the worn, tattered holomap in front of him. His heart pounded. This was the moment, the point of no return. There's an outpost near the refinery district, he said. Not heavily guarded, but it holds a weapons cache. If we hit it hard and fast, we'll arm ourselves. More than that, we'll send a message. A spark had been lit. A fire that would soon become an inferno. Voss met each of their eyes in turn. It's time humanity stopped being prey. It's time we became the hunters. For the first time in generations, the oppressed dared to hope. The Great Galactic Rebellion had begun. The underground bunker was suffocating, partly from the stifling heat of too many bodies packed into a space meant for half their number, but mostly from the tension. The plan had been set. The target chosen. Now came the waiting. Elias Voss stood near the entrance, peering through a crack in the rusted steel hatch. Outside, the Zalari patrols moved through the smog-drenched streets of New Avalon, their reptilian form silhouetted against the artificial light of the towering factories. Their armored tails swayed as they stomped past, rifles slung over their shoulders. Voss felt the weight of what he was about to do. This wasn't just some desperate act of defiance. If they failed, the rebellion would die before it even began. But if they succeeded... A hand gripped his shoulder. He turned to see Sarah Holt, her sharp eyes scanning his face. "It's time," she said. He nodded, inhaled deeply, and stepped back into the bunker. "All right," Voss said, addressing the gathered rebels. "You all know what's at stake. This isn't just about taking weapons, we're proving that humans can fight back. That we're not helpless. That we don't kneel." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Callum Briggs cracked his knuckles. "Then let's stop talking and start doing. #### the attack." The Zalari outpost loomed ahead, a squat, reinforced structure surrounded by towering cargo crates and fuel silos. It wasn't heavily guarded, just a skeleton crew of a dozen Zalari troops, lazily monitoring the perimeter. To them, humanity was nothing more than a beaten, broken species, incapable of organized resistance. That would change tonight. Voss crouched behind a rusted barricade, Sarah beside him. The other rebels were in position, hidden in alleys, behind wrecked vehicles, waiting for the signal. He checked his old, battered pistol. It was ancient by modern standards, but it would do the job. "On my mark," he whispered into his calm, 3, 2, 1. A thunderous explosion rocked the air as one of the fuel silos erupted into a towering inferno. The shockwave sent Zalari guards sprawling. Before they could react, Voss and his team surged forward. The first Zalari barely had time to snarl before Sarah put a bullet between its eyes. Briggs slammed the butt of his rifle into another's throat, dropping it instantly. Blaster fire erupted from both sides as the remaining Zalari scrambled for cover. Voss shot one through the chest, then ducked behind a crate as plasma bolts sizzled overhead. His heart pounded, but he forced himself to focus. This was happening. They were winning. Sarah sprinted toward the main entrance, planting a charge on the reinforced door. "Blasting it in 3, she shouted. Voss fired 2 more shots, taking down another Zalari. Then, boom, the door was gone. ### the price of defiance. The rebels stormed inside, gunning down the last of the defenders. The armory was ahead. Briggs kicked the door open, revealing racks of energy rifles, grenades, and armor. Jackpot! Cheers erupted. For the first time, they weren't just slaves or workers. They were soldiers. But then, a deafening alarm blared. Red emergency lights bathed the room in a hellish glow. Sarah swore. Reinforcements. Voss grabbed a rifle and tossed weapons to the others. Then we hold our ground. Footsteps thundered outside. The rebels took cover, hearts hammering. This was it. The moment that would decide if humanity had a future, or if they would die in the dirt. The first wave of Zalari charged in. And the Great Galactic Rebellion truly began. The first Zalari stormed through the ruined doorway, their scaled bodies gleaming under the emergency lights. They were taller than humans, stronger, and bred for war. But for the first time in history, they were charging into a fight that humanity had chosen. Elias Voss squeezed the trigger of his newly acquired Zalari energy rifle. A brilliant blue bolt struck the first enemy in the chest, sending the reptilian crashing to the ground. The bunker erupted into chaos as the rebels unloaded their stolen weapons, cutting down the second wave before they could fully breach the entrance. But more were coming. A lot more. Barricade the entrance. Voss shouted. Briggs and 2 others shoved crates and overturned tables against the ruined doorway. Sparks flew as plasma fire pounded their makeshift defenses. Sarah Holt crouched beside Voss, switching out the power cell on her rifle with practiced efficiency. "We don't have long," she muttered. Voss scanned the room. They were outnumbered. If the Zalari brought in heavy reinforcements, the fight would turn into a slaughter. They needed a way out. Hashtag a desperate escape. The roof access, Briggs grunted, pointing toward a maintenance ladder at the back of the armory. We get up there, we might be able to steal a transport. Voss didn't hesitate. Move. Cover each other. The rebels abandoned their positions and sprinted toward the ladder. Sarah tossed a grenade over her shoulder. The explosion sent Zalari bodies flying and bought them precious seconds. One by one, they climbed. Voss was the last to ascend, firing downward as more Zalari flooded the armory. The instant he reached the roof, Sarah pulled the hatch shut and jammed it with a rifle barrel. It wouldn't hold for long. Above them, a Zalari patrol skiff hovered over the landing pad, its engines idling. "There's our ride," Briggs said. The problem? It was still occupied. Two Zalari pilots stood near the open ramp, distracted by the chaos below. Sarah raised her rifle. "I got the one on the left." "I'll take the other," Voss said. 2 quick shots. The pilots crumpled. The rebels sprinted toward the skiff. "Get this thing running." Voss barked as he dragged one of the dead pilots off the controls. Briggs slid into the co-pilot seat, cursing as he fumbled with the unfamiliar technology. "I'm an engineer, not a damn pilot." The ship lurched as the engine controls flickered to life. Too late. A Zalari gunship roared overhead, its spotlights locking onto them. The radio crackled with guttural orders. "They're ordering us to stand down," Briggs said. "What's the plan, boss?" Voss's grip tightened on his rifle. There was no turning back now. "We're going through them." Hashtag the first true battle. The gunship opened fire, energy blasts scorching the rooftop as Briggs yanked the controls and sent their stolen skiff rocketing into the sky. Sarah jumped onto the rear turret, unleashing a stream of gunfire. The first few shots missed, but then, boom, the gunship's starboard engine erupted in flames. It spiraled downward, crashing into a factory below. The rebels let out a ragged cheer. But they weren't safe yet. More blips appeared on the radar. Fighters. Faster, more maneuverable than their stolen skiff. This bucket wasn't built for combat, Briggs warned. Voss set his jaw. Then we outrun them. The skiff tore through the sky, weaving between factory spires and towering smokestacks. The pursuing fighters unleashed a storm of plasma fire, forcing Briggs into erratic evasive maneuvers. Sarah took down another fighter with a lucky shot. But then... direct hit. The skiff shuddered as the rear stabilizer exploded. Warning sirens blared. Smoke filled the cabin. "We're going down," Briggs shouted. Voss braced himself. The sky twisted. The world became a blur. And then... impact. Darkness. Hashtag the cost of revolution. Pain. Voss groaned, forcing his eyes open. His body ached, but he was alive. The skiff had crashed in a wasteland outside the city, its hull smoldering. Sarah coughed, pulling herself from the wreckage. Briggs groaned nearby. They had survived. But the Zalari would be coming. Voss staggered to his feet. Around him, the rebels were battered, but breathing. They had fought. They had won their first battle. But war had only just begun. "Get up," he rasped. "This fight isn't over." The Great Galactic Rebellion would not die today. It had only begun to rise. Pain throbbed in Elias Voss's ribs as he forced himself upright. Smoke and fire belched from the wreckage of their stolen skiff, painting the night sky with an eerie glow. The metallic wastelands outside New Avalon stretched endlessly in every direction, miles of rusted, abandoned machinery and poisoned earth. But there was no time to assess the damage. The Zalari would be hunting them. Sarah Holt coughed, wiping blood from her forehead. "We can't stay here." Briggs limped over, clutching his side. "Yeah? And go where?" "We're in the middle of nowhere, half our people are injured, and the Zalari will send search parties. Voss's mind raced. They had escaped with their lives and weapons, but barely. A retreat now would give the Zalari time to regroup and crush them before the rebellion could grow. They needed a new plan. His eyes flicked to the towering skyline of New Avalon in the distance, where the Empire's banners still flew. "We go underground," Voss said. "The old tunnels beneath the city. Before the Zalari took over, they were maintenance corridors. Now, they're abandoned." Briggs frowned. "And you think they won't be crawling with patrols?" "Maybe," Voss admitted. "But the tunnels stretch beyond the city. If we reach the outskirts, we can find more people willing to fight." Sarah met his gaze. "You're not just talking about finding more people, are you?" Voss shook his head. "No. He was talking about something bigger. Allies. #### old enemies, new allies." The Zalari Empire ruled with an iron fist, and humanity was far from its only victim. Entire species had been crushed, their cultures erased. If they could convince them to rise up as well, this wouldn't be just a rebellion. It would be a war. After hours of painful travel through the wasteland, the rebels reached the tunnel entrance, a rusted, half-buried hatch at the edge of the city ruins. With a groan of metal, Briggs pried it open, revealing a dark abyss below. The group descended. The tunnels smelled of decay and abandonment, but they were not empty. Half a mile in, they encountered them. Figures emerged from the shadows, weapons raised. Their bodies were wiry, insectoid, with chitinous plating and glowing eyes. The Zorvan, one of the many species the Zalari had conquered. Once a proud warrior race, now reduced to scavengers hiding in the dark. The largest Zorvan stepped forward, mandibles clicking. "You walk into our domain, human." Voss lowered his rifle, slowly. "We're here to talk." The Zorvan chittered in amusement. "Humans always talk. Always beg. You are weak, like the rest." Voss stepped forward. "Weak? Then tell me, why is the Empire hunting us right now?" Silence. Voss pressed on. "We stole their weapons. Killed their soldiers. We fight because we refuse to kneel. And I think you remember what that's like." The Zorvan leader hissed, his eyes narrowing. "You want to fight?" Voss continued. "Then stop hiding. Join us. You want revenge? Take it." The Zorvan stared at him for a long moment. Then, he laughed, a strange, chittering sound. "Perhaps," he said, stepping aside. "Let us talk, human. #### the plan to break the Empire." Hours later, deep in the tunnels, Voss stood before a gathered force of rebels and Zorvan warriors. Weapons lay spread across the ground, Zalari rifles, grenades, explosives. A stolen armory's worth of firepower. And a new plan was forming. "The Zalari are still underestimating us," Voss said. "They think we're scattered, leaderless. That we're nothing more than a nuisance." Briggs grinned. "Let's show them how wrong they are." Sarah nodded. "We need to hit something big." Voss turned to a holomap stolen from the outpost. His finger traced a location. The Zalari Fueling Depot, a massive supply hub that powered the entire planetary fleet. "If we take it out," Voss said, "we don't just hurt them. We cripple their entire operation on this planet." The Zorvan leader's mandibles twitched in approval. For the first time in centuries, he rasped, "The Empire will fear those they enslaved." The rebellion wasn't just surviving anymore. It was about to strike back. The night before the attack was thick with anticipation. In the underground tunnels, dim lights flickered over the gathered rebels and Zorvan warriors. They moved with purpose, checking weapons, setting explosives, preparing for what could be the most important battle of their lives. Elias Voss stood over the holomap, his fingers tracing the layout of the Zalari Fueling Depot. It was a fortress, surrounded by high-energy shields, patrolled by mechanized sentries, and stocked with enough fuel to supply an armada. Destroying it wouldn't just be a symbolic victory, it would cripple the Empire's grip on this sector. And it would be loud. Sarah Holt adjusted the strap on her rifle. Once we hit the depot, they'll throw everything they've got at us. Voss nodded. That's the point. Briggs smirked. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Voss didn't answer. Maybe he was. For too long, humanity had cowered. Had obeyed, had knelt. Tomorrow, they would stand. ### the infiltration. The assault began in the dead of night. Under cover of darkness, the rebels and Zorvan warriors moved through the ruined outskirts of New Avalon, using the city's shadows as their shield. The fueling depot loomed ahead, a sprawling complex of towering fuel silos, refineries, and reinforced storage units. Dozens of Zalari guards patrolled the perimeter, their reptilian eyes scanning the dark. Voss signaled to his team. Go. Sarah and a squad of Zorvan warriors moved first, slipping through a weak point in the perimeter defenses. With near-silent precision, they eliminated the outer guards with knives and suppressed shots. One by one, the sentries fell, their bodies dragged into the shadows. Briggs hacked into the depot's security grid, cutting power to the external cameras and motion sensors. We've got a 5-minute window before they realize something's wrong, he whispered. Voss nodded. That's all we need. ### the first shot. The team split into 3 groups. Sarah and the Zorvan warriors would sabotage the main fuel lines, planting charges that would turn the entire depot into a firestorm. Briggs and his engineers would breach the central control hub, disabling the alarm systems and delaying reinforcements. Voss and his strike team would take the fight directly to the Zalari, drawing their attention while the sabotage was completed. The first explosion shook the depot. A fuel silo erupted into flames, sending shockwaves through the ground. The Zalari guards snapped to attention, just in time for Voss and his rebels to open fire. Energy bolts cut through the night as the rebels engaged. Voss ducked behind cover, squeezed his trigger, and watched as a Zalari fell. The enemy scrambled to respond, but the rebels were relentless, darting between cover, taking down guards before they could rally. Then the alarms blared. The entire depot came alive. Doors hissed open as armored Zalari reinforcements poured in. Automated gun turrets swiveled toward the rebels, spitting plasma into the battlefield. Voss gritted his teeth. Here we go. ### a fight against time. Sarah's voice crackled over the comms. Charges are set. We need 2 minutes. Voss ducked as a plasma bolt seared past his head. You've got 1. Briggs's voice cut in. Working on the security grid. Hold them off a little longer. Voss peeked from cover and spotted a Zalari commander barking orders to his troops. If they could take him out, it might buy them the time they needed. Cover me, he ordered, then broke into a sprint. Dodging fire, he moved fast and low, weaving through the battlefield. He vaulted over a barricade, raised his rifle, and fired, 3 shots, center mass. The Zalari commander staggered, snarled, then collapsed. The enemy hesitated. And that was all the rebels needed. ### the fire rises. Briggs's voice came through. Security's down. Get clear. Sarah gave the final countdown. 3. Voss signaled the retreat. Fall back. 2. The rebels and Zorvan broke away, sprinting for the exit as fire spread through the depot. 1. The explosion was deafening. The fuel silos erupted, sending massive fireballs into the sky. A chain reaction followed, one explosion triggering another, until the entire depot became an inferno. The shockwave knocked Voss off his feet, heat washing over him like a tidal wave. The rebels watched in awe as the Zalari fueling depot, their lifeline in this sector, was reduced to burning rubble. It was done. ### a war begins. Voss pulled himself to his feet, chest heaving. They had won. For the first time, humanity had struck a blow the Empire couldn't ignore. But as the fire raged in the distance, he knew this was only the beginning. The Zalari wouldn't just be angry. They would be coming. And the Great Galactic Rebellion was ready to meet them. The fires of the destroyed Zalari fueling depot still raged behind them as Voss and his forces retreated into the tunnels. The ground trembled beneath their feet, whether from aftershocks of the explosion or from the Zalari's incoming response, no one could say. Sarah Holt wiped sweat and grime from her face as she jogged alongside Voss. That was loud. Briggs chuckled despite the exhaustion in his voice. Oh, they definitely noticed. Voss didn't respond. His mind was already on what came next. This wasn't just a victory, it was a declaration of war. The Zalari had ruled humanity through fear, convinced that no resistance could ever succeed. But now? Now, the Empire had been humiliated. And that meant they were going to hit back. Hard. ### the hunt begins. The rebels and Zorvan warriors barely had time to catch their breath before the first signs of retaliation arrived. As they regrouped in the underground hideout, one of the tunnel scouts came sprinting in, gasping for air. They're coming, the scout panted. The Zalari fleet, dozens of warships. And they're not just landing troops, they're glassing the city. A grim silence fell over the room. New Avalon, already scarred from years of occupation, was about to become nothing but ash. The Zalari weren't launching a counteroffensive. They were launching an extermination. Briggs clenched his fists. Damn lizards are trying to burn the problem away. Voss turned to the Zorvan leader, whose mandibles twitched in what might have been sorrow, or fury. They don't just want to crush us, the Zorvan rasped. They want to make an example of this world. So no others will dare rise. Voss looked over his people, battle-worn but determined. There was no way they could fight a fleet, not yet. But that didn't mean they were done. We evacuate, Voss said. We get as many people off this planet as we can. Sarah frowned. And then what? Voss's eyes hardened. Then we take the war to them. ### escape from a dying world. The tunnels erupted in chaos as the rebels scrambled to enact the evacuation plan. Civilians sympathetic to the cause, former slaves, factory workers, old soldiers, were herded through the passageways, given what weapons they could carry. The plan was simple: reach the old spaceports before the Zalari destroy them. But as they surfaced, the sight that greeted them was horrifying. New Avalon was burning. Zalari warships hovered over the city, their plasma cannons turning entire districts to molten ruin. Screams echoed through the streets as Imperial shock troops stormed through the ruins, executing anyone they found. Sarah gritted her teeth. We can't fight that. No, Voss admitted. But we can steal from them. Briggs raised an eyebrow. You have something in mind? Voss pointed toward a nearby landing zone, where a Zalari dreadnought loomed over a garrison of troops. The massive warship had landed for resupply, ***, fully operational, fully armed, and about to become their way out, ***. Sarah blinked. You're insane. Briggs grinned. I love it. ### the heist of a lifetime. The plan was madness. Sneak past Zalari ground forces. Infiltrate an Imperial dreadnought. Overpower the bridge crew. Steal the damn thing. And yet, against all logic, it worked. The rebels and Zorvan warriors moved like ghosts through the chaos, taking out isolated enemy squads, slipping past patrols. With their stolen Zalari weapons and armor, they got close enough to breach the dreadnought's lower decks. Once inside, the real battle began. Corridors became war zones as the rebels pushed toward the command bridge, overwhelming security forces with sheer ferocity. Explosions rocked the ship as Briggs rigged systems to fail, disabling the self-destruct mechanisms before the Zalari could destroy their own ship. Sarah stormed the bridge, gunning down the last of the officers. And just like that, they had a warship. # Hashtag from prey to predator. As the stolen dreadnought, Defiance, roared into the skies, the Zalari fleet scrambled to respond. Fighters swarmed toward them, but Sarah took the weapon systems online, unleashing a barrage of fire that tore through the enemy ranks. Briggs hacked the jump drives. I can get us into FTL, but I don't know where we'll end up. Voss stood at the command deck, staring at the burning planet below. The Zalari had raised it. New Avalon was gone. But humanity's rebellion had survived. And now, they had a ship. Voss turned to his crew. Then take us anywhere. Because wherever we go. His fists clenched. We burn the Empire to the ground. The Defiance jumped to hyperspace, vanishing into the void. The war had just begun. The stolen dreadnought, Defiance, ripped through hyperspace like a war spear hurled at the heart of the Zalari Empire. On board, the rebels and their Zorvan allies stood on the precipice of history. New Avalon was gone, but its sacrifice had ignited something far greater than a single planet's resistance. Across the galaxy, enslaved species, oppressed colonies, and broken civilizations had heard the news. Humanity had not only rebelled. They had stolen an imperial warship and lived to tell the tale. Now, the fire of defiance was spreading, and the Zalari were desperate to extinguish it. Hashtag the final gambit. Elias Voss stood on the bridge of the Defiance, staring at the holographic projection of the Zalari Prime Command Station, a heavily fortified orbital bastion where the Empire's highest military leaders coordinated their conquest of the galaxy. Briggs whistled low. That's a tough nut to crack. Sarah Holt folded her arms. More like a death trap. Voss turned to them. It's more than that. If we take it out, the Empire loses coordination across dozens of battlefronts. The rebellion doesn't just win a fight, it cripples their entire war machine. The Zorvan leader's mandibles twitched. And you believe we can achieve this, with a single warship? Voss smirked. Not just one. Because they weren't alone anymore. Across rebel communication networks, species once scattered and defeated were uniting. The Great Galactic Rebellion had become more than just humanity's fight, it was an uprising of the downtrodden against the Empire that had ruled through terror for too long. And now, they were all converging on one target. Hashtag the battle for the galaxy. The Zalari Prime Command Station hung in the void like an unbreakable citadel. Dozens of warships surrounded it, along with automated defense platforms capable of shredding entire fleets. The Zalari, confident in their power, hadn't even considered that anyone would be bold enough to attack. Until hundreds of ships dropped from hyperspace. The Defiance led the charge. The battle erupted in an instant. Rebel ships swarmed the Zalari defenses, their ragtag fleet outnumbered but driven by something the Empire had long forgotten, *** the will to fight for freedom ***. Voss manned the command deck. Target their capital ships. We break their formation, we break their defenses. Sarah unleashed a barrage of fire, taking down Zalari cruisers that had barely gotten their shields up in time. Zorvan strike teams infiltrated enemy vessels, turning their own ships against them. Then, the Defiance did the unthinkable. It punched through the Zalari blockade, storming toward the Prime Command Station itself. Hashtag the reckoning. Voss led the final assault. With Sarah, Briggs, and a strike team of hardened rebels, he breached the command station, blasting through elite Zalari guards. The halls of power ran red with Imperial blood. At the heart of the station, the Zalari Grand Warlord, a towering brute of scaled flesh and arrogance, stood in defiance, refusing to believe his empire was crumbling. You think this will change anything, human? The warlord snarled. We are eternal. We are the rulers of the stars. You are nothing. Voss raised his rifle. Not anymore. One shot. The Grand Warlord fell. And with his death, the Zalari Empire fractured. Across the station, rebel forces overran the last of the defenses. The fleet outside, seeing their leadership annihilated, fell into disarray. Some fought to the bitter end. Others surrendered. The impossible had happened. The rebellion had won. #### a new dawn. The fires of war still burned, but the chains of oppression had been shattered. Across the galaxy, once subjugated species rose up in open defiance, driving out the remnants of the Zalari regime. On the bridge of the Defiance, Voss stood with his crew, staring out at the stars. Briggs exhaled. "We actually did it." Sarah smirked. "Took long enough." The Zorvan leader inclined his head. "You have done what no race has ever dared, Elias Voss. You have not only fought the Empire, you have ended it." Voss shook his head. "Not yet." He turned to his people, to the warriors who had risked everything for freedom. "We may have won the war," he said, "but now we have to build something better." Because humanity hadn't just stood up to tyranny. They had become the rulers of the galaxy. And this time, they would do it right.